So today I'm going to talk about this research work titled Dynamic Pricing and Advertising in the Presence of Strategic Consumers and Social Contagion, a mean-field game approach. This is a joint work with Rabi' Salhab and George Zakur. So here is the agenda. First, I'm going to start with providing some background on the problem that we are interested in. Basically, I'm going to introduce diffusion of innovation theory and mean-field game theory. And also, I'm going to talk a little bit about the consumer segmentation in our framework. And then I'm going to focus on the model, followed by numerical simulations when basically I'm going to provide some insight on our results. And then I'm going to finally wrap up with some concluding remarks. Okay. So basically, in this study, we are considering a specific product in the sense that it will be new class of product or new category of product as opposed to a new brand or basically new model of older products. So we name it innovation, and we have a theory for these kinds of products. Which is called diffusion of innovation theories. I know probably most of you are familiar with it, but I'm gonna give some background on this basically theory. So formally, diffusion of innovation theory is a process by which an innovation is communicated through certain channels over time among members of social system. So basically, we have a new product and we want to see how this new product is going to spread into the market. So the evolution of the demand of this basically new product is going to be the main focus in this basically area. And this theory stems mathematically from contagion models in epidemiology. And its main focus is communication channels, right? So what do we mean by communication channels? Basically, they are means by which an innovation is transmitted to or within a social system. So we have two classical communication channels, namely mass media communications, such as advertising or any other communications that are initiated by the firm. And we have another type of communications, namely interpersonal communications, such as word of mouth or any influences that can basically occur as a result of interaction among consumers. So different researchers in marketing and management science try to develop basically analytical model for the diffusion of innovation. And one of the most important model in this area is BAS model. So based on the BAS model, we will have two adoption drivers or two type of communications channels. We have mass media communications and word of mouth communications, both of which basically force consumers toward adoption, right? And the literature, the subsequent literature named the mass media communication external influences and interpersonal communications internal influences. So they are used interchangeably. BAS proposed that there are two groups of adopters in the market, innovators and imitators. Innovators will adopt independently from social pressure, and they can adopt basically as a result of mass media communication or equivalently innovation effect. However, the imitators are prone to the social contagion and social pressure. So you can see the BAS model. So in the left-hand side, we have the number of consumers at time t. And in the right-hand side, we have two expression, the first expression basically represent the probability of adoption if the adoption has not yet occurred due to innovation and imitation effects times the second expression, which will be basically the untapped market, the remaining consumers. BAS model is considered to be a mixed influence model. Why? Because basically it implicitly assumed that the adopters homogeneously have innovative and imitative tendency regardless of their type. So basically for each potential adopter, he or she may be affected by both external and internal influences, right? But is this the case? There is a literature in this area that actually challenge this assumption. So here in this slide, I'm going to review a little bit about the diffusion modeling from aggregate level. We have two streams of literature that is relevant to our study. One is two-segment model that challenge mixed influence model, and the other one is normative approach that some studies consider. So for the two-segment model, basically the idea is that to challenge the mixed influence model by accounting different adoption drivers for each segment, right? So I have I have brought a couple of examples here in this table where in each study, different adoption driver is considered for each segment, right? And this stream of literature has shown that it would be both empirically and theoretically significant to consider such two-segment structure. Another stream of basically the literature is normative approach, which aims to determine pricing or advertising strategies of a monopolist given the growth model of the innovation. Usually it considers myopic consumers and suggests a skimming strategy for a pricing basically element. So a key aspect in the BAS model and the traditional models is that they focus on the market response rather than the market than the individual one. Why? Basically, it would be convenient to consider such a setting. We know that the adoption decision is individual specific. In the sense that basically each potential adopter, each individual may adopt based on different uncertain valuations or different adoption drivers and so on and so forth. So the individual level diffusion is interested to focus on these dynamics and connect the micro-funded consumer behavior to the aggregate market. I have listed a couple of advantage of this modeling, and the main idea, the way that it works usually is in the following way. So the consumer's utility is based on the new product performance under the uncertainty, and it is updated through the reception of information from mass media communication or word of mouth, and so on and so forth. And in this stream of research, the adoption rule is as follows. A consumer adopts if her utility exceeds the status quo utility. From now on, I'm going to more focus on our framework. So what we consider here in our research is an individual level perspective rather than aggregate one. And we divide the consumers into two categories. We name those consumers who make adoption decision independently from each other and are affected by key external influences like price and firm's goodwill as individualists. And we name those consumers who tend to conform to social clique, but also are sensitive to key external influences as conformists. And here the firm's goodwill, it can represent the brand image, which is built through investment in advertising over time. We also consider, we assume that the consumers are strategic or forward-looking, and in this will be in the sense that the consumers are going to solve an intertemporal optimization problem and choose whether to adopt, and if yes, when to do so. So the adoption rule for such consumers will be as follows. The consumer utility should exceed the status quo utility, and also it should be the highest across the purchasing occasions. What about the firm? So we assume that the firm pre-announces the price and advertising strategies over a finite horizon aimed at maximization of its profit. We also consider we consider pre-announced prices, and from the literature we know that these strategies, in the face of strategic consumers, can be more profitable for the firm, and the literature has shown that this profit can go up to 8%. There are a few examples here that has practiced basically the pre-announcing strategies. In terms of pre-announced advertising, we can think of it as a contract between firm and marketing agency where the investment can be considered as a public information. So here I'm going to talk about how the mean field games is going, how the mean field games theory is going to come into the picture and can be used as a proxy to basically represent or compute the social influences. So I already said that that a conformist adoption decision depends on the decisions of other consumers in the market. And when we have a market with a large number of consumers, we know that the impact of each individual on the mass adoption behavior is negligible. And basically what is important here is that the aggregate effect on each individual, right? So under such condition, it will be natural to use mean field games that basically relies on the law of large numbers and with coupling. So basically the mean field games can reduces the game among an infinite number of people to that of a generic player and the mean field. And please note that we are considering the game among conformists, right, in a Nash configuration, because the individualists simply are going to solve an intertemporal dynamic programming problem. So how the mean field games work? The mean field games under Nash should satisfy the two coupled backward-forward equations. One backward dynamic programming equation that tries to represent a generic player's response to the mean field, and one forward Chapman-Kolmogorov equation that basically reflect the mean field under the player's best response. And mean field game theory can be contrasted with the finite number of players, where a Nash equilibrium can be characterized by a number of equations proportional to that of players. This theory is developed by a series of papers independently by two research teams and has found many applications. So how the individualist and firm come into a picture of the conformist mean field games. So overall, the way that it works is in the following way. The firm is going to pre-announces its strategies before the start of the game. Afterwards, the individualists are going to react to the firm's strategies by solving an intertemporal dynamic programming problem. And after that, the conformists are going to react to the individualist strategies as well as the firm's strategies, while also are reacting to each other's strategies in a Nash configuration, right? And to determine whether to adopt or no, and if yes, when is the adoption date. So once we have the consumer's response in the two segments, the firm will be able to determine its marketing strategies. So what we consider here in this research is a mean-field Stackelberg game where the firm acts as a leader and consumers are assumed to be the followers. So here are the research questions that we are interested to address. How does a new product diffuse into a market composed of forward-looking consumers whose adoption behavior is framed by individual level dynamics and interaction in a two-segment structure? We also would like to address the following question: how marketing strategies are influenced by market penetration of the new product and consumer heterogeneity and interactions. And finally, we also are interested to see how the myopia is gonna affect the equilibrium results. We make two contributions. We make a methodological contribution by proposing a new game theoretic model of innovation diffusion. Basically, we use a mean-field games to develop tractable solutions in order to predict the evolution of the consumer behavior in the market. And we make a substantive contribution by generating new insights on how market penetration of new product is built from strategic decisions of interacting with small consumers and what are its marketing implications. So here I'm going to introduce the model. Let's consider a market that is composed of n consumers, where n is a large numbers, and we have two groups of consumers: individualists, denoted by n capital I, and conformists, denoted by ni. Based on theory of random utility for discrete choice model, we can consider a utility for the consumer that is composed from two parts, one deterministic part and one random part. So the deterministic part is going to represent the observable attributes, while the random utility basically reflects the latent attributes. So for instance, for the individualist utility here, the deterministic part will be this function, the capital U, capital I, with two arguments of P and G, right? Plus the random utility denoted by epsilon. And we have a similar story for the conformist utility. However, instead of goodwill effect, they are affected by the fraction of adopters, by the social pressure. And you can guess that the rho is the discounting factor. And by using the random utilities, basically we can account for the heterogeneous taste of consumers. Here is the individualist's adoption dynamics. So at each time, if the individualist has already adopted the innovation, his state variable will be 1. And when he or she is going to transfer to the next purchasing occasion, the same state will be remain. So nothing is going to change, and he does not receive any utility. However, at the right bottom part, when we have a decision note, if individualist has not yet adopted, he may decide to adopt, right, and can receive this utility. And otherwise, if he does not decide to adopt, he does not receive any utility, and he may consider adoption in the next purchasing occasions. For the goodwill effect that impacts the individualist dynamic programming problem, we consider the Nerlov and Arrow model, where M is the firm's advertising expenditure at each time, and gamma is the consumer for getting rate. A similar adoption dynamics can be imagined for the conformist. So here, if at the bottom part, at the bottom right part, when the conformist decide to adopt, he or she is going to receive this utility. Otherwise, no utility will be gained for this consumer. We can develop the evolution of adopter rates, as you can see here, which is denoted by capital FTA, which is equal 1 over n. N is the total number of consumers times the total number of individualists who have already adopted plus the total number of conformists who have already adopted, which overall represent the fraction of adopters in the market. And also we can compute the instantaneous adoption rate in a similar way. So this will be the individualist dynamic programming problem. We have here the value function, as you can see, which has two arguments. So if an individualist who has not yet adopted decide to adopt, then he's going to receive this utility basically in the first argument, only if it will be greater than the discounted expected utility in next purchasing occasions, which is brought in the second argument, as you can see, right? And here, so the mathematical I represent the information state of a generic individualist, and we can formulate the strategy of individualist as follows. So basically here we will have a threshold policies. If the epsilon takes a value, the random utility, if it's going to take a value greater than this threshold policy, the individualist is going to adopt. Otherwise, she may consider adoption in next purchasing occasion. And at the bottom part, you can see basically the threshold value. A similar story holds for the conformist segment, right? So here the difference is that for the value function, instead of goodwill effect, we have a fraction of adopters, right? And here basically the decision will be, the strategy will be of a threshold policy type, right? And you can also see the value of a threshold basically at the bottom of the slide. So let's see how the diffusion game is going to work. So we know that the firm and consumers interact through the fraction of adopters. So here we have reformulated the fraction of adopters, right? The pi, capital N, capital I, that you can see in the top right corner, basically is the flows of probability for the individualist, right? So it will be the total number of individualists who have already adopted over the total number of individualists in the market. And a similar form hold for the conformist. And we know that if all consumers are gonna respond optimally to the flows of probabilities, their states are gonna be independent. And based on the law of large numbers, these flows of probabilities are gonna converge to the flows of probabilities in a limit, as you can see in the middle right side, right? So pi ii excuse me, pi capital I basically is going to represent the probability of adoption by an individualist, right? And similarly for the conformist, it will be the probability of adoption by the conformist. And we can also reformulate the fraction of adopters in a limiting problem as follows, as you can see in the right bottom part. So the fraction of adopters denoted by capital FTA will be a weighted average of flows of probabilities of both segments. And please note that here the capital pi, capital I, and capital pi I will be the fraction of each segment in the market. And it will be basically multiplied to the probability that the corresponding segment is gonna adopt at each time. So we make the following assumption for the fraction of adopters. We assume that if the size of consumers is gonna increase to infinity, then the individualist and conformist fractions converge to capital pi, capital I, and capital pi I. Basically, it's like we already know the fraction of each segment in the market. And so the remaining part will be like how to find these flows of probabilities for both segments, for individualist and conformist. The answer is that to use the Chapman-Kolmogorov equation to find these flows of probabilities. So for example, for the individualists, we know that their policy does not depend on the flows of probabilities. And basically their flows of probabilities is going to depend on the previous flow probabilities as well as the threshold policy of individualist segment, as you can see. And basically this equation is going to propagate basically it's gonna propagate the whole the evolution of adoption of this segment in the market. So for the conformist, their policy does depend on the flows of probabilities, where basically here the difference will be that the threshold policy is going to depend on the flow of probability per se, right? So since in this forward Chapman-Kolmogorov equation, we know that the threshold policy is going to depend on the flows of probability per se, we need to note that in order to find it, basically, we need to have a fixed point of this map. As you can see by this function, mathcal L, where this mathcal L is composed of two functions, mathcal L2 and mathcal L1. So mathcal L1, basically the first function is going to give us the player's best response under the mean field, right? So this is the mission of the first function. However, for the second function, we're gonna compute the mean field under the player's best response, right? And under a certain condition, we can say that basically there is a set of fixed point for this basically equation. So here is the theorem. There exists at least one fixed point of this function denoted by mathcal L. Equivalently, the limiting conformist game has always a Nash equilibrium for a fixed point of pi I of this function. So it is right that we can find the fixed points. However, the thing is that we may come up with a set of fixed points, and then we need to see how the consumers are going to choose the equilibrium. So we know that the set of potential consumers' reaction to the firm's strategy is going to determine by this set of fixed points, and the firm needs to know that which one is going to be chosen by the consumers in order to design its marketing strategies. So to this end, we're going to make the following assumption. The conformists select a Nash equilibrium according to a predefined deterministic mechanism, which is given by a continuous selection function, right? That maps the pricing strategies and the individualist strategies to a fixed point. So basically, you can think of the selection function as an algorithm that is going to choose the mean field Nash equilibrium based on a given criteria. Under the previous assumption, meaning that we know that the Nash equilibrium, the firm can determine its pricing and advertising strategies by solving the following optimization problem. And under certain conditions, we can be sure that this problem has at least one optimal solution. Note here that Cm will be the function, the advertising cost function, and the SJT will be the salvage value of goodwill. So how the firm is going to find the optimal solution? We propose an algorithm to compute this solution. This algorithm has two nested loops, one external loop and the other one is the internal loop. The external loop is going to use projected gradient descent method to maximize the firm's profit, while the internal loop uses fixed point iteration to obtain the mean field. So basically, in the external loop, the mission will be to improve the firm performance, right, using the projected gradient descent method. And the internal loop is going to compute the mean field corresponding to any attempt for improvement of the firm's performance. And if the algorithm converges to a global maximum, then we're gonna basically have the marketing strategies for the monopolist. So here I'm going to basically present some numerical simulations to illustrate our results and provide some insights. So we have initialized our parameters, of course, and one of the main parameter that I would like to mention here is the fraction of the individualist to the conformist. Here in the benchmark, we assume that the fraction of individualists is 30%, while 70% of them are of conformist type. So for this market structure, we have obtained the numerical result, and we can see that the firm adopts penetration pricing strategies, and this can be due to the forward-looking behavior, because the forward-looking consumers can cause adoption delay, seeking for appealing deals in the future. And basically in the literature, the general result is to suggest a skimming strategy for the firm, unless the word of communications is very strong. I know a couple of studies that have found penetration strategies for innovative products. However, those studies neglected the role of social influences. So basically, we are generalizing this finding for the firm policy. And we will see later on how the intensity of penetration policy going to depend on social influences and the consumer heterogeneity. Here we will have the advertising strategy, which can be seen that is decreasing monotonically over time. So the rationale here is that the firm is going to heavily invest in advertising in order to encourage individualists toward adoption, who themselves also are going to encourage the conformist adoption in the market. This is a well-reported result in the literature for the advertising. Here we can see that there are different diffusion curves for different segments. And for the individualist diffusion curve, we can see that the trade-off between goodwill effect and saturation effect will give us an S-curve form, while the conformist diffusion curve take the concave form for the following reason. The conformists basically are prone to social contagion, and they tend to adopt at early periods in order to induce other people in this segment to adopt faster in the next purchasing occasion. And we can also see that the non-cumulative diffusion curve is different from the classical, well-known, the bell-shaped curve for the diffusion. Here, what we have done is that we have changed the fraction of individualists to conformists to see how different market composition can affect our results. So the benchmark will be in the blue color. Remember that it is assumed 30% for individualists and 70% for the conformists, right? Here, basically, we get the most aggressive penetration pricing strategies when the market becomes mainly populated with the conformists, right? Why is that? Because once we have the market with most of them to be conformists, the monopolies can enjoy from the role of social contagion as a free advertising, and will be able to charge the consumer with higher prices, right? And for the advertising strategy, we can see that still the result will be basically like the advertising should decrease monotonically. And here I would like to highlight that the advertising is decreasing faster when the market is composed of mainly individualists, right? So why is that? Because with the market with higher fraction of individualists, the prices will be lower, and the firm can accommodate to invest less advertising for the brand image. Here are the diffusion curves, again, when we are changing the fraction of adopters, fraction of individualists to conformists. Here we can see two basically observations. First, the total diffusion curve can take both concave and S-curve form depending on the composition of the market segments. As you can see in the panel C. This is first. The second will be like the presence of if presence of one segment is going to be more salient in the market, then the speed or the final penetration of the other segment in terms of diffusion is going to decline. So for example, for the individualists, we can see that the final penetration as well as the final penetration as almost the speed of diffusion is going to decrease as the market become replete with conformists. And in the right top panel, we can see that conformists, the speed of diffusion of conformists is going to decline when the market becomes mainly populated with individualists. Here, we are trying to see how the fraction of the individualist to conformist is going to change the monopolist profit. We have found that the firm will be in the best position when the market becomes mainly composed of basically conformist segment. Why is that? Because when the social contagion becomes dominant in the market, then the firm basically can enjoy from the free advertising and by investing less in the advertising campaign, the firm can get higher profit. So here we are trying to see how the word of mouth sensitivity is going to affect our results. So in the left panel, we can see that when the word of mouth sensitivity is increasing, then the penetration in pricing strategies is going to be more aggressive, right? Why is that? Because the conformists are going to have higher marginal utility, which allow the firm to charge them and charge the whole market with higher prices. And with the higher prices at basically when the word of mouth sensitivity is high, then the advertising become aggressive. So what do I mean? The advertising becomes becomes high when the degree of word of mouth sensitivity increases. Why? Because the prices that are charged are high, and that make the firm to run a more aggressive advertising campaign in order to attract the individualists towards adoption. So here are the diffusion curves when we change the degree of the word of mouth sensitivity. And we can see that the individualist diffusion basically is going to decline at the presence of higher degree of word of mouth sensitivity because of the higher prices. And for the diffusion, for the conformist, basically the effect will be the opposite, in the sense that they're gonna adopt much faster thanks to higher degree of word of mouth sensitivity. Up to now, we have assumed that the consumers are strategic, forward-looking, but we also were interested to see how the myopia is going to affect our results. So here we can see how the myopia, how the basically marketing strategies differ under benchmark as a forward-looking and myopic scenario. The pricing strategy will be mixed penetration and scheming strategies for the following reason. So we basically will allow a weak word of mouth and goodwill effect at the beginning. So the firm is going to start with the low prices until the point that the goodwill effect, the combined goodwill effect and word of mouth effect dominate the saturation effect when the firm is going to cream scheme the remaining market, and we can observe the basically scheming strategies in the later stage, which is not optimal in the case of strategic consumers because, as I said before, they can delay their adoption and it would be, it can damage the firm position. So the advertising policy, as you can see, will be monotonically decreasing here for the myopic case with a little difference in the sense that it would be more aggressive in the first period, in the early periods. And here are the diffusion curves when the consumers are myopic. So what we can observe here is that the firm would be able to attract more consumers from both segments when they are myopic, right? Why is that? Because the marketer, the firm can offer better deals that lead to have a higher penetration rate. And in terms of the monopolist profit, what the firm can get under myopic consumers is 25% more than the case where the consumers are forward-looking, which is consistent with what we have in the literature. So here are some concluding remarks and a few possible future directions. This is the first attempt to integrate in the same model forward-looking consumers, two-segment market structure, pricing and advertising strategies in a fully dynamic framework. We have found that the firms adopt the penetration pricing strategies when consumers are strategic, and the intensity depends significantly on the social influences and consumer heterogeneity measured by a fraction of individualists to conformists. A mix of penetration and scheming pricing strategies is optimal when consumers are myopic. We also have observed that the penetration curves can take different form depending on the mixtures of segment and social influences. And when the individualist and conformist adoption process are different, which fully justify our two-segment model. So for the possible future directions in this literature, usually we have many studies who consider a monopoly for the new product diffusion. So it might be interesting to consider competition in this context. We assume that we have a pre-announced strategies. And so one can look at the feedback strategies, but it could be challenging given the complexity of the model. And one can also think of mixed myopic and strategic consumers, and to see how different market compositions are going to affect the equilibrium results. So thank you, and let me know if you have any question.